Is there any particular difference between, the mane of a horse and the tail of a horse?
Well, one's on the head and the other's on the butt.
Okay.
I don't know. I would imagine that there's differences like the hair on the top of your head is different than the hair on your arm.
Oh, very, very much so.
There's thinner.
Right. What if your beard hair came in like your head hair? You look ridiculous.
I've thought about that a lot. Or if my head hair came in like my beard hair.
You look like... Oh, how do I be sensitive about this? I don't think you can be. There are so many levels of fucked up I could get right now. I could get oddly racial, or I could something about a cancer patient. I don't know. It would be bad. It'd be really bad.
Look like I lived in a hot tub for 30 years.
That's disgustingly specific.
Hate video games.
What's up, everybody? This is the Console Crusade podcast, your favorite equestrian podcast. I'm EJ Olson. I am drinking a coconut LaCroix. I am joined today by Nick Durheim. What are you drinking, my good man?
It's Mire Pepino. Or, as we like to call it, blackberry cucumber.
Okay, I was going to say, I have no idea what that meant. Perfect.
Are we about to gallop on into some horse talk?
Dude.
I've been dying to have a chit chat about saddles. And horseshoes.
Horseshoes?
Jockeys.
What's a jockey? That's not what you got. Speaking of which, that's a bad segue. We're not going to go there. What was that game on the Wii? I think it was like a Barbie horse game that's like actually, or at one time was worth a significant chunk of change.
That's the stupidest bit of trivia you could possibly have.
Hey, man, it reminded me of like on the Wii U, there was that Hello Kitty kart racer game. I think we've talked about this on the pod about how I flipped a copy of that and it really sort of went back on my own principle, and I'm a hypocrite, whatever.
People are sick in the head.
Including myself. Today, we are going to be talking about a few things. Mostly, we're going to be talking about potential Nintendo Classic editions. We're going to talk about the reported leak, quote unquote, and we'll get into that for the 64 Classic Edition. And then we're going to give our own lists, make some sort of amalgamation of what we want to see in potential Game Boy, Classic Editions and what the hardware is going to look like, whatever. But I want to lead this podcast by talking about what the internet's been talking about the last 24 hours with EA and the most downvoted, posts in Reddit history and all this shit.
I'm looking at it right now.
Oh, boy.
It's sitting at negative 585,000.
Wow. That is blown up. I checked it 3 hours ago and was at like 2.5 or 250,000. So, wow.
Yeah, it's still, people are still downvoting it. I mean, when I saw it early, either this morning or last night, I can't remember, and it was at like negative 80,000. That was far and away the most downvoted post in Reddit history.
Are we going to hit 1 million?
By like a long shot. I don't know about 1 million. Depends on if the gaming circle jerk subreddits keep linking to it and people keep seeing it.
Right. So the controversy, and it's funny because we just talked about this, I think, on the last podcast, not about EA specifically, but just about microtransactions and voting with your wallet. And
it's been in the conversation for about a month now,
right,
since the first beta.
Right. So the controversy being all of the iconic Star Wars characters, Luke, Darth Vader, whatever, are locked behind a progression system that requires you to pour 40 hours in per character to unlock. Or you can, shovel out a couple of doll hairs, or more than a couple of doll hairs. I actually don't have the number in front of me. But it's tough, right? Because microtransactions are just a part of the ecosystem now. They're never going to go away, right? I think there's a way to make them work. This is not that way. You can't expect someone to pour in 80 hours into a game to play something that like should be an absolute staple in a game like this, right? It was EA's response that really just rubbed the balls wrong on, or the lady balls, to be all inclusive here. Yeah, really chapped all of our asses. Tell me what this fucking response was.
All right, so the initial post was someone said, seriously, I paid $80 to have Vader locked. And then they continued, this is a joke. I'll be contacting EA support for a refund. I can't even play fucking Darth Vader. Disgusting. This age of microtransactions has gone way too far. Leave it to EA, though, to stretch the boundaries. To which a EA community team member with their official Reddit account replied, the intent is to provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes. As for cost, we selected initial values based upon data from the open beta and other adjustments made to milestone rewards before launch. Among other things, we're looking at average per-player credit earn rates on a daily basis, and we'll be making constant adjustments to ensure that players have challenges that are compelling, rewarding, and of course attainable via gameplay. We appreciate the candid feedback and the passion the community has put forth around the current topics here on Reddit, our forums, and across numerous social media outlets. I'm sure they're loving that. Our team will continue to make changes and monitor community feedback and update everyone as soon as and as often as we can. Whoo boy. So people did not appreciate that. A sense of pride and accomplishment.
I mean, if Battlefront 2 is anything like Battlefront 1, only the sickest of humans are going to put in anywhere close to 40 hours, right? This is a game, especially now that there's a campaign, people are going to run in, they're going to blow through it. They're going to play 20 hours of multiplayer, and they're going to move on to the next game because November, December, we're going to see, an influx of AAA titles. So,
well, this is kind of like the last of the AAA shooters. Call of Duty came out last week, and there's this, and then we've got some ports to Switch, but there's nothing else coming out that's like really big until Red Dead Redemption.
As far as shooters go?
Well, yeah, like big AAA experience shooters.
This is a stone's throw from a classic like Reggie Fils-Aimé answer, right? Where you just say a whole lot of nothing.
Yeah, it's saying a whole lot of nothing, but it's not saying the things that people want them to say. They want them to address it more head on, but they're just saying just feel good kind of stuff, as opposed to dodging it completely, which people would still dislike, but they would probably not be so vehemently opposed to. If they said, we're still balancing it, we can't really say too much more at this moment, then people would be up in arms, but I don't think it'd be 500,000 downvotes.
Yeah, I think because of the way this person worded the post. I mean, the first paragraph, he's essentially justifying the fact that they've done something as egregious as this.
The accomplishment of buying Vader, yeah.
yeah, right. That's in reference to, like, hey, you don't have to pay for anything. If you want to experience the game as quote unquote intended, you'll reap the rewards of this, the pride and the accomplishment of playing through the game and unlocking these characters. I wish I had the number in front of me, how much it costs to unlock.
Right, which that's all been in flux, and it's kind of hard to nail down exactly hours spent to unlock different characters. But some initial posts I was seeing was like 40 to 80 hours to unlock a single character. If you're not doing like the loot box variation, if you're just paying the extra credit or whatever they call the in-game currency to unlock a specific hero. And there's just other weird things that happen too, like they have like an arcade mode, which caps out the amount of credit it will give you on a daily basis. Ugh. So there's like a cooldown. So it's more like a free-to-play kind of model in that regard.
Yeah.
And then there's like daily incentives where you get X amount of credits just for logging in once a day. But then even the reviewers who had the game early had a different scale of credits to like unlock characters than was changed. Like it went from like 10,000 for like Luke Skywalker to 60,000 for Luke Skywalker.
Oh God.
Right. So then that was like drastically different. And then there was a bunch of blowback because of that. So then they changed it down to like 15,000 to unlock Luke Skywalker. But they also changed the amount that you got from gameplay to be a quarter of that. So it's just a big mess.
Yeah, terribly inconsistent. And it does suck for people who come in and they spend $80 or $100 on the... Although I think Battlefront 2 is doing free DLC, right? Unlike the last Battlefront game.
Right, and that was like their... I don't know what you would call that. That was like their...
Big old faux pas last time.
They were like bragging about, oh yeah, this time there's going to be no paid DLC. And everyone's like, yay, it's like Titanfall. Don't have to pay for anything. And then, nope, they just dump a bunch of microtransactions and loot box shenanigans on you.
Well, that was their, Battlefront 1, that was the thing, is the DLC season pass was $150 or something egregious for Battlefront 1.
Would you rather do that or have them nickel and dime you at every single step, Like,
I would always rather pay up front for a complete product. I mean, obviously it's a dangerous business model for the consumer because you get wrapped up into it and there's that mindset and you want to keep spending your money and that, I don't like that. I want to, it's the thing with Mario Run. It was $10 up front. I prefer that model every day of the week. Obviously, Mario Run was, I think, heinously overpriced for a mobile game, but I'd much prefer that. And like I said, get a complete product. Even if that means paying for the DLC Like, it's cool that we're getting free DLC, right? But again, that doesn't matter now that, characters that were in the game right up front last time, we're now either have to basically work a full-time job to unlock these characters, or we have to pay more hard-earned money. Next thing you know, I could be $200 in the hole for a clone of a fucking shooter we got 2 years ago. So it's very frustrating.
I'm not really against them monetizing. It's just there's so much in flux at this moment that nothing's nailed down. Everything's kind of ethereal.
Right.
So we won't really know. I don't think anyone really knows how it's going to shake out until Friday when the game's actually released. I don't know. From there, this has brought up a whole conversation of people talking about whether or not loot boxes are gambling and what that means if the but not FDA, but like the FCC getting them involved and classifying it as like a gambling. You're like, oh, these games are meant for kids. Like, that's a dumb thing.
It's silly.
Don't bring in a government body over that. And like, I don't really agree with the whole it's gambling thing, because you can't make money off of a purchase in a video game. Like, it's different when it has to do with like CSGO and people trading rare knives and stuff over Steam for like real cash.
Yeah.
That becomes a little bit more sticky, and it seems like Valve's kind of tried to address that as well as they possibly can do, because for some reason they can't do anything right.
That's exactly.
But like, this isn't gambling. It's the equivalent of buying a pack of cards, or at the grocery store putting a quarter in and spinning the little lever and getting a weird crappy tchotchke.
Right.
You're always getting something. I don't really like it when it interferes with the actual gameplay. I'm not one of those guys who's like, I want to be immersed. I want to feel the immersion. I am Darth Vader. But like, if it's popping up at me and being like, you could buy this for $1, like, that's going to be super annoying. That takes me out of it. And it's just, I want the game to be a game. I don't want the game to be a method of them to try and squeeze my wallet.
Such a delicate situation, because at what point is a game no longer complete and they're piecemealing what used to be a whole experience? It's kind of like this old crappy illustration that went around years and years ago, where it was like,
oh my god, yeah,
the one with the fast food.
There's been 100
analogy.
Of them.
Yeah. So at what point is it they're just stripping features and then selling them back to us at a higher cost, versus like, here's an entire game and then we're actually giving you more. Some you look at, I'm trying to think of a game that did it really well. I know CD Projekt Red did it really well with The Witcher in their DLC. And I wouldn't even mind the option to say, hey, you can either spend $100 and you're getting X amount of maps, X amount of characters, the credit bonus, armor, whatever it is, or we can piecemeal it, and you can kind of pick and choose if you only want to buy X, Y, or Z. It seems silly to me to lock characters behind a paywall. That seems really weird, especially characters that, like I said, we had before, and so it's like they're taking things away now that we once had. I was gonna buy Battlefront, and after seeing all this, I think, I'm not taking a principled stand or anything, but I'm like, this isn't very consumer friendly. I'm gonna wait to see how it plays out before I give them $60 or $80 or $100 freaking dollars, right?
Right, or even like buy it used,
Yeah. So this definitely convinced me to wait, and I'm hoping it's a great game. I'm hoping it fixes all the things about the first Battlefront, but everything about this and everything I've heard since the beta opened has really not been positive, and they're not doing themselves any favors with this kind of PR bullshit.
Yeah, and it's just a bummer, because I know how much you're a huge Star Wars fan. I like Star Wars. I'm not going to plant my flag and be like Star Wars nerd number 2.
Right.
But like, that'd be a game I'd want to play if it was actually done well. And like, I didn't feel like I was being manipulated by a huge mega corporation like EA. EA, people hate EA. And it's like, that's a totally fair belief to have. I don't think anyone's like, man, I really like Electronic Arts as a company.
Right.
And then that just makes me worried for like, because you were a big fan of Titanfall 2.
Yeah.
And now Respawn is owned, part and parcel by EA, and they're making a Star Wars game. And I can only imagine that's going to be like a Boba Fett bounty hunter kind of thing based on the way you move around in Titanfall, right?
That'd be really exciting.
Like, it's slated as an action adventure game, and that seems like maybe a third person shooter, right?
Hey, you know what? The Jango Fett game back in the day on Xbox, PlayStation, GameCube, not fondly remembered, I don't think, and didn't review well, but I had a very great time with that game. I remember playing at a neighbor's house. It was the Star Wars game I always wanted. It's Boba Fett. Obviously, it was Jango Fett, but Boba Fett is one of the coolest characters in the Star Wars lore for whatever reason, right? For whatever silly reason.
His single line and his bad death by a blind not Jedi.
Right, exactly. Totally silly, but
I'm gonna fall in this living hole.
I always hated the line, and I know it's been beat to death, but where you will be digested over 1,000 years, and it's like he'll be dead in 3 days, right? Like silly, but I think that'd be really cool. Yeah, you said it. I was a big fan of Titanfall 2, and so I can only hope. But again, EA's been a punching bag for a decade. People have hated EA.
They'll finally get that hat trick of canceled Star Wars games if they cancel a third one.
Oh, fucking Jesus. Well, fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But I was really bummed out. Like I said, EA been punching bag for a decade, and only I think the vitriol for a major video game company has only been rivaled by what people feel for Ubisoft or have felt in the last half decade for Ubisoft. The thing is, though, is Ubisoft at least makes quality content, despite all of the bullshit surrounding that company and the different issues they've had. Like, at the end of the day, all of the AAA titles they're spitting out are reviewing well and they're selling well.
Yeah, they're trying. Like, say what you want about the way Watch Dogs looked at E3 versus the way the game looked when it released. Like, yeah, that's bad, but I don't know, maybe don't get your hopes up over a trailer that comes out 6 months before the game does. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's just me, being rational. I can't expect anybody to be rational.
You are as pragmatic as they come. I can't speak today. But the thing, EA doesn't. I feel like they haven't taken any steps to not be the villain. They're just like, well, yeah, we suck, and they're a mega corporation. I get it. Like this, it's silly to expect any sort of decency or any sort of consumer friendly behavior from a money machine like that. But it. Fool me, right? Like trick me. It's the PR machine, and they're doing a terrible job.
Yeah, and I mean they're among the top 3 video game companies in the world. It's them, it's Activision, it's Take-Two, and Activision with the whole patent thing, and Take-Two with their earnings report talking about how like 42% of their money is based off of like microtransactions, essentially.
Yeah,
their GTA and probably 2K18. It's just. If it makes them money, they're going to keep milking that cow until it runs dry.
Yep.
So, I mean, sure, people are going to take principled stances and they're going to complain on Twitter, and that might move the needle a little bit, but you're just going to see the kind of hand waving of them being like, oh, we'll balance it, and they'll pull back a little bit. And people, I've already seen like a couple articles talking about how, oh, they've already reduced it by 3/4 because of death threats sent to EA. And it's like, okay, now you're just putting a weird spin on it because of a handful of people that got way too balls out and being stupid and harassing people online, which that's kind of like one of the 2 ways you interact with people on the internet,
right?
So it's just it gets blown out of proportion, and it's a bummer. I don't know.
I think that's a very select few, but yeah, I saw that with some of the developers, and it sucks because a lot of these developers and these leads of the game studios and the people just doing their jobs and who actually have a passion for this and want to make a good game.
They're not responsible.
No, so it's pretty silly to see that kind of backlash. But like you said, that's how the internet works. But it's such a select few, and like you said on the last podcast, it's just as few people who are going to make a big stink about. Maybe this is a little bit different. 500,000 downvotes and the PR backlash for this is going to force EA's hand to some degree. But generally, we can make a big, hubbub about this on the internet, but really that's only a few hundred, a few thousand people. And look at something like GTA 5, all the controversy that's sort of, despite its success, it's been one thing after another with that in the last several years. There's always something. At least Rockstar, I think they're a solid company and they do listen. But even if a few thousand people say, I'm not buying this game, like it's not going to make a dent in profits. So the companies don't have any incentive to actually change.
Well, and also take into consideration that even if the 500,000 people that downvoted the comment were ones that were going to buy the game and no longer are, what does that really mean for EA's total sales of a game as big as Battlefront? The last game probably sold 10 million across all platforms. This game will probably do similar. So you're looking at 9.5 million of people who are the least likely to pay into their microtransaction scheme. Scheme is a heavy word, but in this case, it seems a little bit likely.
Oh, totally.
So, and I don't think 9.5 million people are paying into microtransactions. They'll probably pop a few dollars here and there, but it's really just the 1% of people who are whales who are spending upwards of like $1,000 on a single game because there are people who have that kind of money and they're willing to spend it on the one game they play. I mean, I know people that only buy, Madden every year, or they buy FIFA if they're in Europe for some reason, or they buy 2K, and that's like their one game. They're not the kind of person who's buying indie titles or buying the AAA single player experience. They're buying their one game because they're not a video game player. They're just, that game is their hobby.
I'm curious to see how this progresses in the coming week. I imagine we'll hear more about this very soon, especially after the uproar today.
Oh, super. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. I'm sure we'll talk about this next pod, but let's move on. I want to address something really quick. We talked about Mario again last week briefly and how I said I was going to finish it before we recorded today.
You didn't.
I am in New Donk City. I went through 4 more kingdoms since we last spoke, and I've been playing it and I've been enjoying it. I've been less meticulous about finding every little thing, knowing I'm going to have to come back anyway after in the post game. But I've been making some progress, and I figure this classic edition talk will kind of be a nice holdover, and we'll definitely be able to do a nice segment on the next pod, fully in depth. Only 3 weeks late on Mario. Only 3 weeks late.
Only. It's still relevant. People are going to be talking about it for at least until January. I mean, for Game of the Year discussions.
Game of the Year, yeah. So
you're good. You're good halfway to 2/3 way through the game. So you don't have too much more.
Yeah. So there's one thing that you did want to chat about before we jump into the meat of the pod.
Yeah, do you want to chat a little bit about this this maybe leak?
From Das Vergeben.
Yeah, I guess he goes by Vergeben on some other forum. This is posted in the Kappa subreddit, which if our buddy Max is listening, he's probably familiar with because it's like just like shit posting and memes for the FGC, the fighting game community.
Right.
So this guy has previously leaked characters being included in Injustice, including the Ninja Turtles and Enchantress, which are 2 kind of groups that you wouldn't really suspect being added. So it kind of gave him a little bit of credibility.
The Turtles that's a cool addition. Let me just throw that in there. That's awesome.
Even though, aren't they technically Marvel? Or are they? No, they're Marvel. Well, because their enemies are the foot, and it's based off of the hand. I think they were probably published by Marvel at some point.
That was the hand, the foot. That was obviously that was a parody thing. I want to say it's like IDW.
I don't know, but I also know they do Transformers. They do a bunch of those cartoons that turn into comics. They did Sonic, they have Sonic now. Archie used to be Sonic. Anyway, me, the comics fan. So this guy talks about some Street Fighter V stuff, which I don't really care. Cody's in it, Max, maybe. There you go. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Talking about a bunch of characters that are in development, potentially. Well, I mean, whatever. I mean, I'm not going to buy that game. It looks like crap.
Right.
Resident Evil 2 remake.
More RE remakes.
Yeah, I mean, someone out there is super excited for that. I don't know why. Devil May Cry 5. There was a DMC game that was kind of a soft reboot done by Ninja Theory a few years back. I think that was like the weird cusp between console launches. Was that 2012, 2013? I remember Andrew getting the port of that on PS4.
That's our buddy Andrew Chavez from the Precipice Between Two Hills podcast.
Yeah, the preview to
the poop to.
Yeah, I had a cool sound to make in regard to that. Anyway, guy also talks about some Bandai Namco properties, including the upcoming Dragon Ball Fighters. Fighters.
I'm really excited for this game.
Yeah, it looks really, really good. Unfortunately, though, he has intel, perhaps, that 3 of the DLC characters are going to be Broly, regular Goku, and regular Vegeta, which seems like
odd.
Kind of like that's like the Darth Vader of unlocks in Dragon Ball. So that's kind of like, if that's the case, that's not great.
So I'm curious because I also see on this list that they're talking about Goku Black, which is a character from Dragon Ball Super. So I'm curious if some of the main playable characters on launch are going to be Dragon Ball Super versions of these characters. In an attempt to push, the dub is in full swing now here in the States, and they're just releasing some of it on Blu-ray, and they're just trying to push that a little bit. I'd understand that. And
I haven't been paying attention to fighters, but isn't there a god form in the game?
I also have not paid attention since the first 2 weeks of the hype.
Right. So, come to us for your Dragon Ball Fighters news.
I'll be all over it when it comes out. all over.
Right, which is early next year, like February, I think. I don't know if they have a release date. I might just be talking out my ass. A guy also talks about Bardock and Raditz, which as being potential DLC characters. Some other stuff about Switch port in the works because it's an Unreal Engine game. So UE4 works fairly well with Switch. It would probably be lower resolution. I mean, it's already a cel-shaded kind of game, so those games scale very, very well.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome if we got that at 60 FPS. That's kind of necessary for a fighting game.
I don't know, actually. This is one of the few games I might not purchase on the Switch, just because of the nature of the controls. And even the Pro Controller, it's got a garbage D-pad.
Right, and just the even fighting online, if you have any interest in that, it seems like Switch is not, unless they have some huge announcement in January about how making everything magically work the way everyone wants it to, which is about as likely as maybe one of these rumors on this list, which we'll get to.
So yeah, that might be a PlayStation purchase for me. But
yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair.
This guy has a little footnote at the bottom of the post, a little bit of Nintendo news.
Well, I wanted to mention Soul Calibur 6.
Oh my God, this is still a franchise.
Yeah, I mean, Soul Calibur 5 apparently people did not like. I don't know when that even came out. That was probably like 2010, 2011, but seems like, I mean, that's based off of Tekken, right? So Tekken 7's been doing really well. Pretty sure it's Tekken. I could be just totally wrong.
This is the Console Crusade podcast. We're informed as hell over here.
Super informed. Soul Calibur 6. I was told it'll be for PS4, PC, and Nintendo Switch. There was no Xbox One version mentioned to me.
Take that, motherfuckers.
Japanese game is Japanese, and Xboxes are nowhere near Japan. So, I don't know. That's something to maybe keep an eye out for. Apparently, it was supposed to be announced at PSX last year, but there was some sort of problem with the development, which, I mean, this guy might be just totally talking out his booty hole. So, who knows? But then the thing that caught my eye, and I think the place I saw it linked from was the Nintendo subreddit. So I'd like to go through these few little bullet points and kind of get your thermometer gauge popping.
Hit me. I'll give you my hot takes.
All right. There has been pressure towards Game Freak to get Pokemon's 8th generation out in hopes of a release next year. If you recall, Pokemon Stars, that is or was real, but all it was a Sun and Moon port to the Switch used as an engine test tech demo thing.
So,
did we ever talk about Stars? Was that like a pre-E3 kind of bubbling about conversation? We probably did.
We had to have mentioned it. It doesn't shock me that they use it as a tech demo, if that's the case. And I get why they had to do the half-ass sequel on the DS, because the DS has tens of millions of units out there, and Sun and Moon are the best-selling games of all time. And this is just the smartest financial decision. I get it. I don't like it. I would have much rather had a port of Sun and Moon to the Switch with gorgeous full HD graphics and be able to play it on my TV. I'd much rather have had that.
I'm 100% the opposite of you in that regard.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not going to start a console with a port of a game. Are you kidding me? In Pokemon? When is
Why
Pokemon
not?
ever... Okay, so imagine the Game Boy Advance comes out and the first games are Fire Red, Leaf Green.
Cool, man. I love those games.
You got to start with the third gen and actually do a real third generation before you do a remake of an older generation with the new tech.
How many people would prefer to wait 3 years for an 8th generation or get a port right out the gate and then wait 2 years? You know what I mean? Like, I would rather have something.
That's not in this post, but there's already some other rumors about Nintendo being like trying to get because even when they announced Pokemon at E3, they said 2018 or later. So there's still a possibility that we'll get a Pokemon game end of next year.
If we do, it's going to be a disaster. It'll be a Pokemon Black and White, but even worse because they're making the jump to 3D. I think it's going to be a while before we sort of get what we want in regards to a fully 3D console Pokemon game, especially if it's rushed out in the next year. That seems very infeasible.
Well, it could be that they get some other studios to kind of pitch in and help. I mean, we've got precedent for that with the Pokemon Stadium games being co-developed by HAL.
Yeah. So
that's very, very possible. And they have the senior team working on the Switch Pokemon and the junior team working on Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. So maybe the older team has better skills. Who knows? We don't know. I don't know what goes into making a Pokemon game. This game could have been kind of being worked on for the last 2 years. We don't know.
Well,
we'll never know because Nintendo.
If Sun and Moon, if those games are any indication, that team clearly does know how to make a 3D game. how a lot of the just things like camera movement and
That's just like your opinion, man. And also your camera isn't controllable because there's no second stick on the 3DS.
no, I know, but the way the camera moves and the way you're going from segment to segment, the game felt so old in so many aspects. And I remember the first night I was playing it, and you and our buddy Trevor, who's been on the pod, you guys had come down to my place, and I just remember saying, like, there's a formula for how this works. Why is it so hard for Nintendo to follow it? The Pokemon Company, in this case. Why is it so difficult? And why is it so clunky? These things that shouldn't be getting in the way of an otherwise enjoyable experience. But I don't know. I think the Switch, that's just going to add a whole host of complications and variables that development team is not prepared for.
Irregardless, it probably won't be a game for either of us because we are now in our 20s and not the target demographic for Pokemon.
But we're going to buy it anyway.
Yep, because we're sick in the head. Next bullet point, we got Metroid Prime 4 should have something revealed with some in-game footage early next year from what I've heard. I'm hearing that direct in January particularly. Bandai Namco is developing the game for Nintendo. I don't know which development studio. Bandai Namco is a big publishing conglomerate kind of combination of what used to be Bandai and what used to be Namco. So I don't know which studios of theirs are actually in-house, but that makes me kind of think, I've been saying this for a little bit, but you know who works a lot with Bandai Namco? A little company called From Software.
Okay. You love these guys.
We haven't heard anything from them since the second DLC pack for Dark Souls 3.
Which was what, 6 months ago?
Longer than that. I think that was like January, February.
Really?
It was like 8 months ago, yeah.
Wow, okay. I think that'd be really cool. There's been some hubbub about, I've said hubbub twice in this podcast, so I should probably stop.
Switch it up. Say hullabaloo next time. Or maybe a kerfuffle.
A kerfuffle. People have been talking about, do we think Metroid Prime is going to be a classic first person Metroid game, or are they going to go the way of the cover shooter, or are they going to, somehow try and change the formula? Because look at all the franchises, our Zeldas, our Marios, that have been drastic departures from other games in the franchise. So I would assume if From Software did do it, you think that would look more like a third person game than a classic first person Prime game? What would you want?
I mean, I don't know what their pedigree is with first-person games. I know they've done a lot of sci-fi stuff with the Armored Core series, which I've never played. But I would imagine if they did a third-person game, it would be more reminiscent of maybe a less jump-scary Dead Space.
Okay, yeah.
Because that game has a very meticulous dark sci-fi vibe. And that's always been kind of a hallmark of Metroid, is that you're very alone. It's a lot slower than like a Mario or Zelda, and it's not really focused on the combat. It's more about, it's like a murder puzzle.
Right.
There's just stuff in your way, and you're trying to, the environment is what you're fighting, not the enemies. Except for bosses. There's traditional bosses in Metroid games.
I expect this is a game we will not actually see much of until 2019. At the end of 2018, it'll be released 2019. I feel like we're quite a ways away.
They started development with that JPEG
right
at E3 last year.
Right.
That was the moment they started working on that game.
Right. I imagine it's the same for Pokemon though. As they threw together that video a week before E3 and
no, yeah, they broke into that poor man's office and gave him a script and put a gun to his head. It's like, just say it out loud. Say it.
Right.
All right, there's some kind of new Animal Crossing that they hope to release next year too. That seems fairly obvious. They've got all the assets from that horrible Wii U abomination. It would go great with the mobile title.
Right.
Seems like a slam dunk. Switch's virtual console will not be how like how it currently is known to be, like some kind of subscription service of sorts in the works. That seems kind of likely. I don't know about that though.
I'm not complaining about that though. Again, if
it depends on how it's implemented. It really depends.
Right.
Mother 3 is real. Real fake. According to my source, it was completely localized and playable. The sad thing that I've heard is that it's being held back for some reason. It's being held back for eternity, which all I know has something to do with not knowing which month to release it in. Okay.
Okay. All right. That sounds like a very fucking Nintendo thing. The game's been localized and playable for more than, 7 years or some shit? I mean,
over 10.
The game came out in what, 2006?
Anyone who's ever wanted to play that game already has, and I don't know how many of them would actually buy it.
Right.
Especially with the price that Nintendo would probably put on it, which would be $15.
God, it's ridiculous. Unless, like you suggested off the pod, that they do some sort of like Mother trilogy a release. Or, and I said, I'd pay for a physical copy of Mother 3 on the Switch. I'd pay $30 or whatever it is. Cave Story was $30, right? I'd do that.
Yeah.
Or remakes.
Right, which Nintendo does do, but I don't know how likely it is for them to do that in the Mother franchise. I just thought, okay, so they did the Mother 0 or the Earthbound Beginnings, Mother 1 localization and release on the Wii U Virtual Console, which is like the weirdest thing.
Right.
Who was asking for that? That's like arguably a not good game.
Not at all.
Like very, forward thinking and ambitious, but Earthbound was essentially a remake, but was good.
Right.
Of the NES version. Like there's different story beats, but a lot of the same character types, essentially. But Mother 3 is a completely different thing. Came out on the Game Boy Advance way past the Game Boy Advance's lifetime and never got an English localization, even though they did the Fire Emblem thing where they put a character in Smash Bros. Of a character that it never came west.
Right.
Just this weird thing. And then there was Lucas DLC in Smash 4. It's just so many signs, but they tease us. They throw fireballs, Reggie.
Well,
killing that poor man.
I think Mother 3 is more likely to show up on a Game Boy Classic than it is initially, at least on the Virtual Console.
Think they'll Star Fox 2 it?
100%. I think that's actually going to be their marketing strategy for however many more classic systems they do. I think that's going to be their MO, is to bring some long lost port of a game or something that had never been released at all. But yeah, we can kind of dive into that here in a minute. I think there are two more things on this list.
Yeah, they're a little bit smaller because I don't really have a claim in either of them. Also said that Square is going to be doing The World Ends With You 2 exclusively for the Nintendo Switch, which that was a DS game, DS RPG late in its life.
Okay. Never heard of it.
Well regarded. I've never heard of it before getting back into gaming, but people like it. I think Leaf was talking about it in the group chat. Shoutouts. Then Blizzard potentially doing a Hearthstone port for Switch, which makes sense. It's already playable on tablets and phones. I don't know why you wouldn't have it on there.
I wonder what the incentive is for Blizzard to do this, because I imagine Hearthstone is a game that if you're not playing it, you're not going to play it. And I don't know if the market's big enough to kind of open up to a whole host of people on the Switch who already own tablets and smartphones, right?
Well, I think the incentive is that there's literally no other competitive card game on the system. Yeah. So it's an entire market that they can take. I mean, there's not really any competition for Hearthstone. Some people play Legends, and I think Valve's got some card game that might get Valve people to play their games. But I mean, Hearthstone is like the de facto, that's the card game.
Right.
So might as well, take complete ownership of every platform. Except I don't think it's even on PS4 and Xbox One. So maybe I'm just talking out my butt.
Let's move on from this. Let's terribly segue into what we now only have 25 minutes to talk about. But the other day, a list came out of N64 game manuals on the UK Nintendo site. And everyone went crazy and didn't use their brain for a goddamn second. Everyone went nuts thinking, oh, this is, confirmed N64 classic. Okay.
I don't think I even heard about this.
Really?
Personally. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So 21 games, I believe. So hear me out. Let me run through this list. And then we will we'll get into our personal list for what we kind of want this to look like. So, okay, all right. Honestly, I think this is a not great list, although there's, publishing rights and, all sorts of factors. But
every time you say a title, give me like a single moment to make a noise of assent or dissent.
Okay, all right. In alphabetical order here. 1080 snowboarding. Yeah. Bomberman 64. Yeah, okay. DK 64, of course.
Yeah.
Excite Byte 64.
Oh, yeah.
Really? Really?
I mean, I don't know. There's been 3 Excite games.
In lieu of a lot of other games here. Okay, F-Zero X. Makes a lot of sense. Kirby 64.
Yes.
Mario Golf.
Yes.
Okay, Mario Kart 64. Duh. Mario Party 2.
Yeah, that's the good one.
It's the only Mario Party on here. So, yeah, I never played a Mario Party game in my life. So, okay, Mario Party 2 is a good one.
Yeah, widely regarded as fact.
Is this the one that children lost the skin of their palms to?
I believe that was the first one that they had to send gloves to people.
Dude, that's ridiculous. That's only 1998 or whatever, right?
Play it loud, play it hard, palm it.
So Mario Tennis.
Yep.
Okay. Paper Mario, of course.
Oh, yes.
Pokemon Snap. Star Fox 64. Super Mario 64. Earlier I said Mario 64. I meant Mario Kart 64.
Right, yes.
But yeah, Super Mario 64. Both Zelda games.
Right, of course.
Wave Race.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And
Yeah.
Yoshi's Story.
Now, here's the real question. Where's Pilot Wings?
So, right? Honestly, that's right. There was one more game on here.
Just like Pilot Wings was missing from the SNES Classic.
Right. And thank God for it, too. I had a fucking moderator remove a Reddit post when I was complaining about Pilot Wings potentially being the SNES Classic. And apparently I pissed somebody off. But the last game on this list is Sin and Punishment, which is a game that obviously did not come to the States, but was localized.
We got a virtual console release.
Yeah. And so that's what this list was manuals for the virtual console, for the Wii Virtual Console. Everyone ran with it and thought it was the 64 Classic Edition, incoming, whatever. I think this is half of a good list. I think a lot of these titles would be real. I mean, 1080 Snowboarding, Excite Bike, Mario Tennis. Pick one of the sports games. Wave Race, really, like that's not a game that holds up. No one really has nostalgia for that.
Pretty synonymous with the N64, though. Same with 1080 Snowboarding. It's not the list of the best games, but it's the list of the most remembered games.
Let's get into our list here, because I have a list that varies.
I haven't compiled anything, so I'll be throwing stuff right off the top of my head. The only things really that obviously we're probably going to talk about is the licensing, is the rare games. I mean, sure, you got Donkey Kong 64, but that's a Nintendo property, as opposed to Banjo-Kazooie, which is now a Microsoft property with like nuts and bolts and stuff. But Microsoft, I think that they seem pretty chill with Nintendo, and I think that they would be totally fine with licensing out their properties to be on other hardware things, especially since there was that Phil Spencer quote talking about how, they already have Minecraft on every single goddamn platform possible. That their back catalog, I think, especially with Nintendo and Rare, I think that'd be a lot more possible than people give it credit.
Totally. And I think given the success of the last two Classic Editions, I don't see why they wouldn't do it, especially because this is hardware in all-in-one versus like we're going to license this to be sold and distributed by Nintendo virtually and indefinitely.
And Microsoft is going to get they're going to get theirs.
Right. Oh yeah. The titles that have not been sold in the virtual console that I would want to see. I made my list trying to be realistic. I wasn't trying to throw every great game on here because we have 32 games as opposed
Ogre
to 20.
Battle.
Right? I mean, honestly, and given the fact that the 64 has 30 good games and only 3 good RPGs, or anything that resembles an RPG.
Yeah, and that was like one of that small handful of NX games, Square/NX games on the platform.
Right. Give me some of the games that were not on that virtual console list that you would want to see on a 64 Classic Edition. And let's just throw licensing out of the window here. Like, what should the definitive, let's make our own list here. Let's say no more. The NES had how many games?
30.
And the Super Nintendo was 20 plus
21. 21, yeah.
So let's say no more than 25 games. What's this going to look like? Let me get my phone out so I'm not clicking clacking here, and I want to make the Console Crusade 64 Classic.
All right, perfect. Do this on the fly. We had a lot of fun doing this with the SNES Classic. Makes a lot of sense. We'll do it again.
Hell yeah!
So obviously we get the rare platformers with Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie. I think both of those are worthy additions. Yeah, same with Conkers. Even I think Conkers Bad Fur Day that was a big swan song for the system. I mean, it came out after the GameCube came out, I think. And it was one of the very few M-rated games on the system. And it was like Rare, that was their one last hurrah. And it was huge. It was a very big moment for them.
I thought about this. I think there's no way this makes it to the Classic Edition because then the Classic Edition would have to be literally like rated M, right? Because you can't sell that to children.
It's worth bringing up, though. If I didn't bring it up, I'd get crucified by somebody.
Sure. But so we've acknowledged it and
I think, though, that Diddy Kong Racing needs to be on there.
100%. I definitely put that on there.
Really, you want to do all the multiplayer games. I think you do have the system itself have 4 ports because that was such a big aspect of the console itself. Had 4 ports, had 4-player games.
Right.
It was everyone huddling around playing GoldenEye. GoldenEye ideally would be on there too. I don't know if that would ever be possible.
Has to be, though. That's a thing. Licensing, can it be possible? It needs to be. But alternatively, Perfect Dark, I would say, is arguably a better game in every way.
No, yeah, you're definitely right. It's just the music and the stages and the characters are so iconic. People would be kind of mad, but I think they would understand in the end. But if you can't get one, you get the other. I don't think you need Perfect Dark if you have GoldenEye, though.
No, absolutely not. And people, even though Perfect Dark's a better game, so many more people played GoldenEye, and that's such a synonymous title with the 64. So I think that in an ideal world, we'd get that.
I think also one of the Mystical Ninja Goemon games.
One of the Goemon games?
I've played a couple of them. There was one that was like a 2.5D side-scrolling action game, and there was one that was more like a Zelda title. I think one of those would probably fit. Same with like something kind of off the wall like Mega Man 64, Mega Man Legacy on.
Oh, Mega Man Legends, yeah.
But it was 64 on the 64.
Okay, that's a dark horse. Let me put. I want to make like a maybe list here.
Yeah, same with like Turok. People have very fond memories of Turok, even though if you play it now, it's a foggy mess. But it's kind of worth mentioning.
But like on the best of the best, the definitive 64 experience, is Turok gonna make it? Not likely.
Potentially.
Really?
I mean, potentially. It depends on how many titles they have on the system.
If we're talking like really great multiplayer games, and we want to nix stuff like 1080 snowboarding,
Killer Instinct.
No, I mean, do we need a fighting game? Really, Killer Instinct Gold? That wasn't spectacular.
I mean, it was like the fighting game on the 64, and the Super Nintendo had Street Fighter, and you're not going to get Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat or anything like that on the 64. But like that's important gaming history, and people remember that fondly.
So let me throw Killer Instinct on there.
I don't know. It's at least worth mentioning because that was a 64 game. I had stickers on my Super Nintendo from Nintendo Power for Killer Instinct, like coming out on the 64.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you ever play it?
Power, no, I don't think so. Maybe I rented it once.
Okay.
But I don't remember it. Because fighting games are totally obtuse when you're 6 years old.
Right.
And when you're 26 years old.
Time changes nothing.
Is Smash Bros. Not on that list?
Smash Bros. Was not released on that virtual console, it didn't look like.
Okay. Right? How did I not remember that until just now?
Right? Smash Bros. Obviously has to make it.
I'm so sorry, everybody. That's so bad. How did I do that?
So let me pitch this to you. Instead of the Wave Race, instead of the Pilot Wings wasn't on the list. It's actually on my list. But instead of the Wave Race, instead of the tennis snowboarding, what if we got like the Snowboard Kids?
I was going to say that, but I think it's more well known by collectors because of how rare they are.
Right.
With 1 and 2. I don't know if they have this kind of cachet to pull people's interest, but it also could be like one of the dark horse kind of things like Star Fox 2. But if you're already putting Sin and Punishment on there, that kind of fills that role. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about that because there's a lot of weird titles that I've got on my Game Boy lists. So
right.
I don't know.
Mischief Makers. Really underrated multiplayer game.
Yeah, people like that.
What about something like Beetle Adventure Racing? I would argue it's the best racing game on the system, outside of Mario Kart.
I don't think you need 3 racing games. Because I really think Diddy Kong Racing deserves a spot. Because it's a different enough experience from Mario Kart, but you can't not have Mario Kart because it's fucking Mario Kart.
Right.
How about Buck Bumble?
Okay. All right. I ain't putting none of that bullshit. I ain't putting no Gex on this fucking list. I'm not putting any...
Chameleon Twist.
Oh, God. Okay, well, on with the real list here. So obviously...
I have a real list.
Kirby has to make it.
Yeah, Kirby's on there.
Okay.
Kirby 64 is... I love that game. That's a great Kirby game. It's my favorite Kirby game that I've played. I haven't played all of them. That's my favorite.
So obviously both Zelda have to make it. So we're at 14 games right now, and we haven't even mentioned Star Fox has to make it, right?
Obviously, I'm saying like all the first party like big titles have to make it. I think even the Mario sports games deserve a spot. Even Mario Party, even though I don't really like Mario Party.
Both.
That's like a 4-player game.
Both sports games, or let's say we have to choose one. Which one are you choosing?
Tennis.
Yeah.
It's a more active multiplayer game. I think they would lean pretty heavily on that, especially since they did that with the SNES, with the 2 controllers in the package.
Right.
I would imagine they would do a similar thing with the N64, despite it probably costing more because the N64 controllers is so goofy.
Right.
And probably harder to manufacture than the slab of plastic that the NES and SNES ones were.
Right. So Pilot Wings, I don't think is going to make this list. F-Zero, I think will.
Yeah, definitely does.
So here's my pitch. Let's get a little off the rails here. Here's my pitch for the N64 Classic. I don't think Sin and Punishment is going to be incentive enough. It's something like Star Fox 2, which is like infamous for not having been released. Sin and Punishment may very well make the list. I don't care so much. But what if their little incentive for picking this up is Obviously, if they get the rare titles, that'll kind of be, that'll be a big deal in the market, the share of that. But what if we get N64 disc drive exclusives on this system? So F-Zero with the expansion that was exclusive to the disc drive. It's got 2 extra cups, a create your own course mode. And obviously F-Zero is not like a marquee title, but it's one of those quirky little things that I think can get people's attention and will appeal to collectors.
I was kind of under the impression that there wasn't really much of value that was put out on the disc drive.
There's not. That's kind of
it's that and then Animal Forest, which is Animal Crossing in Japan on the N64 DD.
Whoa, how fucking cool would that be though to get a localization of that? We wouldn't, right?
It'd be cool, but it would kind of kill Animal Crossing on the GameCube Classic, right?
Well, not necessarily. It's just kind of a quirky bit of history. I think the other thing from the disc drive that would be really fucking cool and would give Nintendo, the option to produce more peripherals that no one will actually be able to find is Mario Artist Paint Studio. Because now is there a chance to be like, hey, we bought this title. It's like Mario Paint but better, and it's sort of a never released in the States sort of thing.
Nah, give me a phone app for that.
Well, I figured I'd throw it out there. I would be interested. I was looking at screenshots of it. It looks fucking badass.
I'm letting you throw it out there, but I'm also gonna fucking spike it right in the ground.
You're being a real dumbass, CJ.
Along with your hopes and dreams.
So anyway, let's get the last couple of no-brainers on there. Here's where we're at right now. We're at 19 games. Both Banjo games, DK Racing, GoldenEye or Perfect Dark, Goemon, take your pick, Killer Instinct, Smash Bros. I have Snowboard Kids and Mischief Makers. Should I get rid of Snowboard Kids?
Yeah, put it on like a maybe.
Okay.
Because I don't know if it has enough pull. And also, was that a Ubisoft joint? I don't even remember who made that.
I can't recall. I think
Rayman 3 would be interesting.
Which one?
Was that Rayman 2 or 3?
Rayman. Rayman is not very synonymous with me with that system.
I played it. I played that game on PC, but it was a good 3D platformer. It was very fun.
That came on a green cartridge, correct?
I believe so. Yeah. Oh, Doom 64.
Really? You think?
Maybe.
I think that could be really cool in lieu of.
It was a unique game, if I recall correctly.
Well, then I feel like if we talk Doom 64, then we can get into the weeds of should StarCraft 64 be on here, and should.
Well, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think SimCity should have been on the SNES Classic.
A game doesn't hold up, but I don't know why they licensing and costs and everything, but they
published that game.
They should have had 40 games on the Super Nintendo Classic.
Yeah,
unless they're planning a sequel, but
it's just the game value and keeping that kind of precedent. I don't know. Yeah, I mean they have to pay licensing, and then I'm sure they priced it accordingly that they're making money, but not gouging consumers. I don't feel gouged paying $80 for those 20 games personally.
Sure, no, I think it's perfectly reasonable. What about Pokemon Snap? I'm adamant that it has to be on there.
Yeah, I think it belongs on there. It's the only Pokemon game really worth playing on the 64.
So here's the question. Name one puzzle game on the 64.
There was a Tetris 64, wasn't there? Or Hatris. I remember playing this game on our buddy Sam's EverDrive. That was this really, really, really weird puzzle game. It had to do with, it was this isometric view, and there were puddles of water, and you could terraform and lower and raise the land, and you're trying to form these puddles and move the water around. No idea what it was called. Very bizarre. Yeah, 64 didn't really have a lot of puzzle games, did it?
I think Pokemon Puzzle League would be a lock on the system.
No, that'd be a handheld title. That's on my Game Boy Color list.
But the 64 doesn't have any puzzle games. Why wouldn't they use their own property? I think Puzzle League's another underrated title. But anyway, so we're at 22 games. Again, I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing anything crucial.
And to be fair, they didn't. They did the Tetris Attack in the Japanese, the Super Famicom Classic, the Panel to Pon.
What do you think of Harvest Moon 64?
People like that game, don't they? Or I think I have it on my Game Boy Advance Classic list because Friends of Mineral Town is regarded fondly as one of the better Harvest Moon titles, or the first really good one, or the last really good one. I don't know. It's all kind of Harvest Moon fans know what they want. I'm not really plugged into that community, but worth mentioning though. Yeah, Natsume title.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it on there. I think it's enough of a departure from the rest of the titles on here.
One of the 3 Japanese games not made by Nintendo on the 64.
Right. Okay.
Same with like Ogre Battle.
Do you think Ogre Battle should be on here just given the lack of RPGs?
Yeah, I think that would pull more than what Sin and Punishment would pull.
Ogre Battle 64.
Cool tactics game.
We're at 23 games. Let me read them off here. Actually, we're at 24 games because I just realized DK64 is not in here.
Yeah, it should be on there. Same with like Paper Mario. I'm assuming you have those kind of locked in. Okay.
So, Banjo 1 and 2, DK Racing, GoldenEye Perfect Dark, Goemon Killer Instinct, Smash Bros, Harvest Moon 64, Mischief Makers, Kirby, Mario 64, Mario Kart obviously, both Zelda games, Star Fox, Paper Mario, Mario Party, Mario Tennis in lieu of Mario Golf. I think we should we'll only see one of those. We only need one of those. F-Zero. I still contend that they should do the disk drive add-on and create your track and the extra cups. I think that'd be a cool little add-on.
Yeah, if they can make it work, yeah.
Yeah. Pokemon Snap, Pokemon Puzzle League, Yoshi's Story, Ogre Battle, DK64. 24 games.
I think it's a pretty solid list.
So some sort of left-wing contenders, something like Blast Corps.
Yeah, people really like Blast Corps.
Something like
Space Station Silicon Valley.
What the fuck is that?
It's who made that game? I don't even remember who made that game, or really what the premise is. I just remember you can control different characters by like selecting them. Like you're jumping from character to character.
I think that's a solid list. 24 seems like a weird. Let's do 25. I want what
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2.
I wish, even though that's the worst version of that game. No, Game Boy is the worst version of that game.
Maybe,
but the audio,
it's a completely different game.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, the audio though on the 64 is just garbage.
Well, I mean, the good thing is that you'd only have to license 15 seconds of each of those songs.
Right.
Before it looped. And you get a cool blue cartridge, which isn't present on the classic.
Hey, man. Didn't they have they had the blue cartridge, but they also... No, it was just the blue cartridge.
Yeah, that was the blue cartridge. DK had the yellow cartridge. Doom had the red cartridge. Zelda had the gold cartridges.
I think there were some sports games that had different
black
color.
cartridges.
Yeah.
A lot of Maddens in black. Blitz. NFL Blitz.
So I was going to ask you about that. NFL Blitz, I think...
That's a fair arcade port, but I mean, they didn't do Jam on the SNES, and that's like...
Right.
I think we even had Jam or Hang Time on 64. That got ported to everything for a long time. Midway.
I don't think Blitz would make it. I don't...
It wasn't a great version of that game. It was like almost competent.
We played the shit out of that as kids together. I think that's one of the games that your brother owned and was really into.
Yeah.
I need one more game. I want to make this around 25.
Oh, geez.
Around 25. that doesn't make
it
any sense.
It is around 25. It's 24. That's around it.
A nice round number, like 25.
Were there any Resident Evil games on 64 worth playing?
I don't know. That seems, again, sort of...
Castlevania 64 is terrible.
Yeah. Do you want to go Mega Man 64?
I think Mega Man 64 might be the only Capcom game worth mentioning.
Yeah, let's throw that on there. That would make that makes people happy. That's a well-regarded game. I don't know how the N64 port was, but
me either. Probably had better rendering distance than the PlayStation version.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, let's see. It's 10 o'clock. How long do you have before we get to bounce off here?
I can go for a little bit longer.
Give me a number so I can try to measure how we blow through the next two.
20 or 30.
Okay. Cool. Let's. I think that's a solid list for the N64, and obviously that's all subject to licensing. What does the hardware package look like? 2 controllers for $100?
For 25 games, it would be more.
So you think $120, 25 games, and 2 controllers?
Because the way I think of it is less about the actual plastic and more about the game licensing.
Right.
But with the NES Classic, we had $60 for 30 titles. So that breaks down to $2 a title.
Yeah.
SNES Classic, $80 for 20 titles. That's $4 a title. I think the N64 games are probably pulling closer to 6 or 8 a piece.
Ooh.
So if you got 25 titles, that's either like $150 or $200.
That's way too much money for something like this.
Right. Ideally, yeah, you'd probably want it to be like 120, but at the same time, that's pushing past this is kind of a cute little thing to get and more of a hardcore kind of collector's item. I don't know if you would see a 64 with 25 titles, but if it had 25, I think they would ask for 120 or plus.
I honestly think the only reason the Super Nintendo was so much more expensive was because of, I think the hardware is what cost so much to produce here, because it's small batch, a bunch of proprietary crap. They're recreating these controllers. Like the Super Nintendo had 20 games, and not a lot of those were licensed. A lot of those were properties that Nintendo has the rights to. And
each of them were about half and half.
Was it about 50-50?
Yeah, it was like 15 or 16 first party games on the NES and about 10 or 11 on the SNES.
I think more realistically, the 64 Classic would have probably less than 20 games, probably closer to like 12 or 15 games. And
they could do purely first party with that pretty easily.
Yeah, and I think if they did that, if they did just a few games, they would do strictly first party, not even bother with licensing, and then they could do 2 controllers and they could put this out for $100 or less.
I also think that would be the wrong move. I don't know how many people that would appeal to. I think it'd be much more appealing if it had rare titles and if it had a few of those other kind of niche, like 1 or 2 of those niche, well-regarded titles.
I think no matter how they do it, not everyone can be pleased, right? You're not going to be able to get all the games that we have nostalgia for, and you're not going to hit it at a price point. Or they're going to put 4 ports on this thing and then sell only 1 controller with it, and half the games on this list are completely irrelevant, unless you spend more money.
If they do it, it's going to be a completely adequate list like the SNES and the NES. SNES, I think, was definitely better, but I also have a lot less nostalgia for the NES, and I think the games in general are just worse.
Well, let's move on to the Game Boys here. I want to, before we talk about the games, I want to talk about the hardware for not only potential DMG, Game Boy Color, but also Game Boy Advance. There are a lot of different forms this could take. Mm-hmm. I want to kind of hear what you think the ideal Game Boy Classic, the initial Game Boy Classic, what that looks like.
The hot, sexy, wet dream of it?
Yes, sir.
Well, it's got to have a rechargeable battery. It's got to have a screen actually on the system. It's not just a plug and play to the TV.
Right.
It's got to be backlit.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to last forever. It has to last at least 2 hours.
For something this light, there's no reason we can't get real battery life.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, but like I'm saying that's like bare minimum.
Right.
And then it has to have audio also. So it has to have a speaker. And it gets out of hand real quick if you put a screen on the thing.
Right.
And that's what makes me scared.
So, but here's the thing. Does it also have TV output, or is it TV output, or is this going to be a strictly handheld device?
It has to have TV out.
Which means it needs controller ports and a controller solution.
Right. And I think if it comes with the controller, it comes with the NES controller. Same with Game Boy Color. Game Boy Advance come with a SNES controller.
I think that makes sense. That would actually be really cool to get Game Boy colorway of those controllers, and then they're not having to go back to the drawing board for anything like that.
Oh man, don't even mention colorways. Imagine the Game Boy Color,
right?
And the 5 or the 6 colors, because you get got grape, kiwi, daisy, berry, and teal.
Those names make me so happy.
That's great.
That's
and you got
so
your atomic
nice.
purple with the controller and everything. That'd be really, really cool.
Yeah.
But I think the original Game Boy, the DMG, it's going to be DMG. It's not going to be Pocket. It's going to be full on the size of a DMG, because that's already about the size of an SNES Classic, if I'm not too much mistaken. I think more realistically, it's not going to have its own screen, because that means you have to have screen, you got to have audio out, headphone jacks out potentially, a battery. It complicates everything so much, and that's kind of the antithesis of what these devices are. So it's going to take a lot of like soothing and messaging to be like, no, it's okay. We know it's a plug and play, but like it's not $100, so don't worry.
Well, I mean, I'd pay $150 for a fully functioning, something that feels like original hardware with a backlight, with controller ports, with like the Pro device. I'd pay a little bit more for that, and I think most consumers would, considering, what you're getting with it.
I don't know if you're going to get the same kind of rush of demand that you have for the SNES and the NES Classics if you break over $100.
Yeah, that's such a tough situation, right?
Yeah, you're bouncing on a knife's edge for that.
So let's do the same thing. I made a list here. I couldn't go more than 14 games and 15 games on the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance, respectively. I've
got 30 on Game Boy, 20 on Game Boy Color, and additionals on Game Boy Advance.
Holy crap. I'm not even going to bother making a list. I just want to hear, because I have a feeling we'll have some crossover, but you have so much more than me.
Yeah, I'm just going to mash through, because I just have a bunch of games, and a lot of them are super obvious.
Right. A lot of obvious stuff. Let's talk Game Boy, and let's assume that the Game Boy, even though it's a DMG housing, it's going to be Game Boy Color and Game Boy games, right? Not strictly original Game Boy games.
No, I've got original Game Boy games and then Game Boy Color games
Holy fuck.
specifically. Yeah.
Oh, that would be irritating to me if they do just DMG. Like, I think they should do a Game Boy, something that incorporates Game Boy Color games, and just kind of do it all. But
I'm like only minorly cheating with one of the Game Boy titles on the list, but I think it fits. And you'll know it when I come to it.
okay, all right. Let me hear what you got.
But all these are Game Boy gray cartridge games.
Okay. Fuck.
So we got Super Mario Land 1, 2, and 3.
Oh wow.
Mario Land was a launch title.
Yeah.
Not a great Mario game. Mario Land 2.
Hey, I
fantastic
love
game.
Mario Land. Love that game.
It's not. It's like a weird ROM hack Mario game. It's like it's not a Mario game, but then they put Mario in it. Mario Land 2 is a fantastic game. You ought to play it. Mario Land 3 is Wario Land. Is the first. Mario Land 2 is the first introduction of Wario because he's the final boss. But Wario Land is the first of that series, and then there was 4 of those, and then a GameCube title. So a lot of those games. Donkey Kong 94.
So I looked at these, and the one thing that in my list that I was doing, I think that if it was a port or
Not a port.
was that one not?
It had the game. It starts off with Donkey Kong, and then it opens up and is an entire full campaign of levels.
Really?
Yeah.
Is this the one that's
And it
based on the NES games, or on the Super Nintendo
arcade game?
Okay, yeah, right,
Kind of. So like you're jumping up girders and it's a puzzle platformer.
right.
But it introduced the side jump for Mario.
Okay,
First game to have that. Kind of interesting. Kirby's Dream Land 1 and 2.
yeah,
Metroid 2 Return of Samus.
of course,
Obvious. Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow.
yeah,
And Yellow is the cheat because that's a Game Boy Color game. But
right.
it's Gen 1. So it has to be.
It'd be Red, Blue.
I'll put Yellow in there.
It was they were compatible though. Same with the second gen. Gold, silver.
Well, I mean,
also,
I was being
yeah.
finicky with these being gray cartridge, not like the black. Like if you want to do Link's Awakening DX, I had to just Link's Awakening,
Right. Fair enough.
So moving down, we got Tetris, Dodoi, Mario Picross, the first Picross game,
Oh wow.
Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening,
Yep.
Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, the second of only 3 Kid Icarus games of all time.
Isn't that funny? The best Kid Icarus game, Super Smash Brothers.
You're gonna like this Game and Watch Gallery.
Which one? Because I also had that on my list.
I don't know. I just one of them, at least one of them. It doesn't
Or
matter
all of
which
them.
one to me.
All of them.
Well,
There's
it
at
depends
least
on how you
4.
want to break it. If you want to break it down, I've got some in here that are kind of iffy, but I think a lot of these are kind of lock-ins. A game called Alleyway. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's like a breakout game. So that's first party. So if they don't want to shell out the coin for third party licensing, then that's definitely a full
Right.
choice. Final Fantasy Adventure and Final Fantasy Legend. At least one of the Legend games. Because those are kind of interesting RPGs. They stray away. They're not actually Final Fantasy games. They're part of the Saga series, which I've never played, but it's got different races that level up in different ways based off of either what you eat or enemies you destroy or equipments. It's just really, really bizarre. Kind of interesting.
So let me ask you, I'm sure you're getting to it, but I'm curious if you have Dragon Warrior Monsters on your list.
Not on my Game Boy Classic list, but on my Game Boy Color Classic list, yes.
Wait, wasn't that game a Game Boy game?
Game Boy Color, backwards compatible.
Oh, okay. God damn it.
Black cartridge, dog.
Okay.
Get with it. Then we got Gargoyle's Quest, which was
Quest.
based off of the character Firebrand from the Ghouls and Ghosts series, but it's not like Ghouls and Ghosts, not punishingly hard. Also, other games in the series were Gargoyle's Quest 2 on the NES, and then Demon's Crest.
Demon's Crest, yeah, that's the one.
on
I
that
couldn't,
NES.
I couldn't remember That's a pretty sought after game on the old
Yeah.
Super Nintendo.
Yeah. And then also from Capcom, we got Mega Man 5, which a lot of the Mega Man games on Game Boy were these weird bastard hybrids of 2 of the titles on the NES. So Mega Man 1 on Game Boy was a combination of enemies from Mega Man 1 and Mega Man 2. And then Mega Man 2 on Game Boy was a combination of Mega Man 2 and Mega Man 3. This weird kind of situation, but Mega Man 5 was completely different. Had all new enemies and bosses.
In
Whole new
those
title.
in the prior games, were the levels also ports from?
Yeah, I think they were just like watered down versions of those levels.
Okay, gotcha.
A little bit. But Mega Man 5, that's like the sought after one. It's the expensive one as collectors. It's the one that people like to play the most too.
Yeah.
So it would make sense for it has that cachet. Konami got Nemesis and Kid Dracula. Nemesis is a shooter. It's like Gradius.
Right.
And then Kid Dracula is kind of a Castlevania parody, but it actually plays well because all the Castlevania games on the Game Boy were kind of crappy, in my opinion. Also, I think a good addition for the Game Boy is Golf. Didn't get it on the NES. Classic.
Okay.
But it's a great game, and it's very playable on the Game Boy. Wario Land 2. Mole Mania. It's a puzzle game. First party.
That's some deep cuts, man.
Revenge of the Gator is a pinball game. I think that's the HAL joint, maybe first party. I think I was getting kind of funny with these last few editions. Donkey Kong Land 2.
See, yeah, I don't. Those you want to talk about?
Donkey Kong Country 2 wasn't on the SNES Classic, so I was like, well, maybe they'll do it here.
That's talk about bastardized version of.
Yeah, that was a funny little throwing it out there. I think we can both agree that Quirk should be on the
Fuck yeah.
Game Boy Classic.
Give me that little weird onion man. I'm all about it.
I wrote for my description is, look at this fucking tomato. He's got to push blocks and navigate mazes, save as GF.
Check out episode 4, Developer Origin Info, for more about Quirk. What's his Japanese name? What was it? What was the?
Well, I mean, the sequels were Amazing Tater. Was that it?
Oh, yuck.
Or is it Spud's Adventure? I can't remember. Something about potatoes.
Right.
Stupid.
I always associated that little man with having been an onion. That is not right.
He's a tomato with cool sunglasses and like a mohawk.
He's a mater.
So that's 28. 29, Bubble Ghost. I don't know if you've ever checked it out. It's a puzzle game where you play a ghost and you're blowing a bubble and trying to avoid spikes. Just a little puzzle game. Real cute.
Okay.
Real cool. Only came out on Game Boy and like it was an arcade port, which I've got a couple kind of like listed in here too. Like Avenging Spirit, which was, I believe that was a part of the 3DS Ambassador program, or it might just be part of the eShop for 3DS. But that was a Game Boy game and a arcade game and nothing else. One of those weird cases where it got ported to Game Boy, but not SNES or NES.
Right.
A weird kind of situation. But that's like a $200 game.
Wow.
Very rare, but well regarded, and like people like it, obviously, or else it wouldn't have been put on eShop.
Right. I think you made the right call going for 30. I think something like this, given the nature of Game Boy games, or mobile games in general, especially games that are 20 plus years old,
they're very small. They're very short experiences.
Right. And so I think this is like kind of the perfect list. You hit all the major stuff. You throw in some great little quirky offbeat dark horse contenders. Mm-hmm. Again, this so much of this depends on whether this is a mobile device or if it's strictly a plug and play. If it's a plug and play, a lot of these titles I don't think necessarily matter. No one's going to sit down to play some goofy puzzle game for more than 5 minutes on their TV. You know what I mean?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, Tetris was on the NES Classic, wasn't it?
No, it was not.
Dr. Mario?
Dr. Mario they used, yeah.
Which I was thinking about Dr. Mario for the Game Boy, but it was a same day release on NES and Game Boy. But I think if you have the NES Classic, you don't need to kind of cross-contaminate. I was thinking about that with Donkey Kong Land also.
Yeah.
But I figured the one kind of caveat you could make is that Donkey Kong Country 2 wasn't on the SNES, even though it should have been.
Yeah. So
other kind of dark horse, not very likely titles would be something like Adventure Island, which is based off of the Wonder Boy series. Wario Blast, which is a Nintendo published like port of the Japanese release of Bomberman, but featuring Wario. Kirby's Star Stacker, which is a Kirby puzzle game. Kirby's Pinball Land, which is a pinball game. The Doi. Tennis. Guess what that is. Double Dragon 1 or 2. I'm not sure if those actually play very well, but Double Dragon got some love on the NES, if I'm not much mistaken.
Yeah.
Samurai Showdown had a Game Boy game. Solar Striker is a first-party shooter akin to Gradius or Nemesis, and then a game called Kicks, which is really weird. I've played that. I own that game. It's based off of an arcade title where I'm sure you've seen it, but it looks like a screensaver. But there's these like diagonal lines, like kind of vector drawn that are moving across this square, and you're moving around the perimeter, and you go inward, and then you're trying to block off as much of the screen as you can. You have a goal of like block off 60% of the screen, and you can't be touched by the diagonal lines that are bouncing around while you're jumping in. So you're like sort of scooping out areas that the line can then no longer bounce through.
Only
kind of
something you'd find on the fucking original Game Boy.
Right.
No, I think that's a good call. I think maybe even boost it to 40 games. But again, the licensing for a lot of these things is even more complicated, especially, how inclined is Nintendo going to be to go out and reach out to all these companies, half of which probably are completely defunct, and who knows who owns the rights to some of this shit.
Yeah, it gets really weird, especially with companies like Sunsoft and Jalico and Technos. Like
Jalico, dude.
Yeah, that Jalico is Avenging Spirit. Like they're super dead and gone. I think they got bought by Infogrames, which got bought by Atari, which now is this weird thing. So it's just you do what you can, but there is some precedent because that game did get an eShop release. So apparently
really?
somebody knows something.
Okay. Well, let's blow into our your Game Boy Color list. Like I said, my list was I was trying to think what's the best of the best and titles.
20.
20. That's a big list. Okay, hit me with them.
All right, got Pokemon Gold, Pokemon Silver, Pokemon Crystal,
Of course.
Pokemon Trading Card Game,
Hell yeah.
Mario Golf, Mario Tennis,
Yep.
Super Mario Bros. Deluxe,
Yep. Okay.
Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages, and Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons,
Naturally.
Pokemon Puzzle Challenge,
Okay.
Wario Land 3,
Yep.
Pokemon Pinball.
I mean, I guess it could be.
I know you're partial about the Game Boy Advance version, but that was my Pokemon Pinball.
I think the Game Boy Color version is really not very playable.
I
probably
loved it
more
when
so
I was-
today.
I loved it when I was a kid.
That's the big cart that you put the battery in
Yep.
for the Rumble.
Yeah, I had Rumble, dude.
That's hilarious.
I mean, it's no Little Mermaid pinball, but it's a close second.
you played Little Mermaid pinball?
No, but I see it on eBay all the time, and I'm just like,
Oh, okay.
it's the same like Rumble pack and everything.
Right.
And then that's all the first party stuff I have.
Okay.
And then we're gonna jump into some Konami with Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, that's on all of the sort of top games of all time. It's one of those games that I just always assumed that was a port of the NES or an iteration, spiritual remake of the NES game.
No, apparently it's actually playable.
Really? Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
Apparently. And then also from Konami, Survival Kids.
What is that?
It's a survival game.
That is vague.
Well, have you ever played a survival game like Don't Starve?
I have not.
Man, you're spinning plates. You're managing your resources, your hunger, you have to build shelter. Don't get killed.
On the Game Boy Color, really?
Yeah. So I thought that was really kind of interesting, and people like it. It's also on a lot of those lists.
That's hardcore.
Did a lot of research.
Yeah.
I was scrolling through a lot of titles.
Oh,
Moving on to Capcom, we got at least one of the Mega Man Extreme games. I don't know about one or two. I put 2 on here because Extreme is kind of closer to a port of Mega Man X, but Extreme 2, I think, differs more from Mega Man X than the first Extreme title.
okay.
And it was also the only one of those that is strictly Game Boy Color, whereas the other one was backwards compatible. Then also from Capcom, Shantae.
Naturally.
Yeah, I think we both hit that. Harvest Moon, I put on there because there's a few Harvest Moon titles on color. So I don't know.
I wonder how some of those titles hold up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. These are all like, I've got a bunch of other titles that I have as like shout outs as like potential ads. But then moving away from Natsume, we got Hamtaro Ham Hams Unite.
Dude, anything Hamtower, I'm all in on.
Which is one of the 2 Game Boy Color games, I believe, that got ported over to the West. And that was Nintendo published. So
yeah.
whoever owns the property, they just have to sign it off. And I think Nintendo would be very happy about that.
Yeah.
Some of my kind of dark horse contenders would include R-Type, because R-Type, people like R-Type.
Yeah.
Blaster Master Enemy Below, which is a sequel to the NES Blaster Master, which is also an NES classic. Bomberman Quest, which is a very interesting 2D Bomberman, kind of a puzzle game. All the Bomberman games are kind of puzzle games, but those actually 2D with like platforming. Kind of bizarre. Tokitori, which was a very late Game Boy Color game. That was the Capcom joint. Like a puzzle game where it's really weird. It's really, really good looking. Like, it's amazing how good it looks.
What's it called? Toki?
Tokitori.
Tokitori.
Toki space Tori. Then also Resident Evil Gaiden as far as good looking games, but I don't know how playable it is and how much people would actually want to buy into it.
Man, you were right. This is gorgeous for a Game Boy game.
A lot of like frames of animation. The background parallax is very well done.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it looks very easy, but I don't know if it gets harder later on.
Very colorful.
Something I kind of saw popping up a lot was a game called Azure Dreams.
Azure Dreams.
Yeah, have you heard about that?
I have no clue what the fuck that is.
Apparently, it's like a dungeon crawler, monster collector in lieu of like Monster Rancher or Pokemon.
Okay.
But I guess it's more closer to a sim than an RPG. I'm not sure. And then a special shout out for you would be Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets.
You know, Game Boy Color. I thought about that. We've talked about it on the goddamn podcast, but that game it really holds up. I don't know. We can split hairs about that, but it is surprisingly really enjoyable. Adequate. Yeah, it's surprisingly adequate, especially for a licensed title.
Right.
But yeah, just a really quirky, weird card-based combat sort of, but a turn-based RPG. Like, dude, you still need to just pop that in and play it.
Yeah.
There's this dope-ass minigame where you have to denome the garden, and you're just trying to see how far you can throw it. I remember doing that for hours.
I remember looking into the Harry Potter games and then trying to compare and contrast the Game Boy Color versions versus the Game Boy Advance versions, because apparently the Chamber of Secrets release on Game Boy Advance is nothing like the Game Boy Color version.
Nothing, yeah.
But apparently, the first game is more closely related to the Game Boy Color version.
Right. I never played the first one I played the first one on PC and PlayStation.
I think I remember. I played one of the Harry Potter games on PC where you actually had to do the mouse and draw little shapes to do the spells.
So let me
draw like a spiral for Alohomora and draw a keyhole to do. Or that was Alohomora, and then Wingardium Leviosa was the spiral.
The spiral was Defendo. Wasn't it? Defendo.
Which is not a real spell.
It is not. So let me get tangential here. I remember you had it was Sorcerer's Stone for the PC, and I was also playing that on the PC at the time. And I remember my parents coming over to your, or my mom maybe came over to your place, and I brought my copy of the disc thinking that's where my save was, so that I could play my save. I don't know how old we were, elementary school. And
you don't know, that's just what you did with like cartridges.
That's right. It's
bring your cartridge over, had to save.
Yeah, and so I brought my disc over, and I remember popping it in, and it didn't work, and it wouldn't even actually load. If I recall, it wouldn't even load, and it was getting an error, and I was like, "What's going on?" And that's the day my life changed forever.
But no, you're probably on like Millennium Edition, and we're stuck in '98.
Something like that, right?
Probably.
I remember the troll chase. There's it's kind of like an old Crash Bandicoot level where the ball's chasing you and you're running backwards, running towards the camera.
Glorified QuickTime event.
Right. Oh, good stuff. Defendo. I always remember that. Like that's not a spell, man.
Yeah. So I had to put that on there just because a lot of people do like those games. I don't know what the licensing could be like because that's a WB property.
Yeah.
And that was EA developed or published. Big time. That's got to be in like some sort of limbo.
So let me throw a dark horse out there that I have talked about. Dark horse that I have talked about. Okay. I've talked about this game numerous times. I don't know anymore if it's been on the pod or not, but Dragon Ball Z Legendary Super Warriors. Very reminiscent of, obviously no one who's listening to this has ever played these, but the old old Famicom Dragon Ball games.
Right.
They're semi, not open world, but they are oh god, it's kind of like Zelda 2. We've got with the overworlds in that respect, and the combat
Was that NX also?
Oh, I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Just because I know Akira Toriyama ended up working with them for Dragon Quest. So.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure who put those out in Japan, but again, card-based combat where literally you have a deck of cards with moves, and you're very kind of interesting. It's kind of a throwback to that. A game I absolutely loved as a kid. I absolutely love now, and I think that'd be really great to see. We don't kind of prior to 3D games, we didn't get a lot of good Dragon Ball games, and Dragon Ball is one of the biggest franchises on the fucking planet. Especially
even in 3D games, you don't have a lot of good Dragon Ball games.
Right, but it wasn't until Budokai that it was finally like. I mean, we had some good fighters that came out on Super Famicom, but they were such because Dragon Ball was so niche, it didn't really take off here in the States till the late 90s, early 2000s.
Wasn't there like a decent RPG on the Game Boy Advance?
So there was the Legacy of Goku series, and then the third in that.
I think that might be what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, Legacy of Goku. The first one was pretty rough, but we all loved it. Second one was solid, and the third one was called Boo's Fury. It was actually a really quality RPG.
Isn't that just the story, man? You get the first one, it's not very good. The second one's a lot better than the third one. They don't make enough because the system's dying.
That's exactly
and you can
it.
never find in postmortem.
Yeah.
That's every single game.
Yeah. Well, I kind of went a little wild there and kind of interrupted your list. Where
I mean, mine wanes off a lot. I got Tony Hawk Pro Skater just because that's like
right.
As much as the game is kind of rough, it's a marvel that they got it on the Game Boy Color, and that's like, and there's no licensing you have to deal with for like music. I'm not sure if there's no likenesses. Just change the names, whatever.
Right. Well, even then, like, is that necessary? Do we have to go back to the licensing again to put someone's name? And I mean,
they'll keep Tony Hawk, but just everybody else give them fake names.
Oh, I can't wait to see what Nintendo would possibly come up with.
Just like what was that baseball game? Other titles, Worms, Armageddon. The Worms games are great. They work really well on a handheld, I would imagine. I have not played this version, but Worms is a series that lives to this day.
Yeah.
Mr. Driller. There's a Game Boy game.
Mr. Driller.
Also an arcade game. I haven't played it, but looks cute. It's Bandai Namco joint.
Okay.
Here's a fun one for you. Monkey Puncher.
I've never heard of this, but I need to have.
The point of the game is you're training a monkey to compete in monkey boxing. It's a strategy game. And you can date your monkey with another monkey to breed them to make a better fighter.
How did I not know about this? This is literally my perfect game.
Just Google it for you.
Give me the name again. Monkey Fighter?
Monkey Puncher.
Monkey Puncher. Okay.
That's one thesaurus line away from Monkey Spanker.
Wow. Oh, gross. Dude, this is... Look at that art with the little Super Saiyan monkey looking motherfucker. The boxing gloves.
Yeah.
Dude, wow. I'm into it.
And then past that, I mean, you've got a couple Pokemon clones like Metal Walker and what was that other Robopon? Only other ones would be like Rainbow Islands is kind of notable because it was a sequel to Bubble Bobble, but it was also had an NES release, but didn't see it on the NES Classic, so I don't know how much desire there'd be for the Game Boy version on the Classic.
Did you throw Dragon Warrior Monsters on there?
Yes.
Okay, so
one, but not two, but because it had a split sequel, and I was like,
yeah.
So you have the same kind of appeal as Pokemon.
You own that game.
Yeah.
Growing up, what do you remember about that?
I remember it was very cool because you had less monsters with you than you did in Pokemon, but they're all fighting at the same time. It was kind of like that classic RPG layout where you had your 3 fighters and you could face up against multiple enemies at the same time. And you'd have moves that would affect like a row of them. So the method of fighting was a little bit more intriguing in that regard. You still had special like moves that you could have them do. I think it had like an auto fight kind of mechanic. There was no Pokeball. The way you would capture enemies is if they're the last one there, you could feed them different kinds of meats. And depending on the quality of the meat, it would make them like you more. So if you give them like beef jerky, they'd be like, oh, they like you a little bit. But if you give them prime rib, they're like, oh shit, this is dank. And they'll want to hang out with you.
You're describing my relationship right now.
Yeah, right. So you would entice them to join you, and then introduce. I'm not sure when in relation this came out to gold and silver, but I had breeding. But instead of it just being like, oh, one of the parents, it's like that, they would actually combine and have special children based off of their parents. So you could actually get like stronger monsters by doing that. And they would inherit move sets and different like attributes and traits, I believe. It was a lot deeper in that regard. And it had a lot of Dragon Quest music, which I don't have any nostalgia for except for playing that game because I didn't play Dragon Warrior or any of the titles before that.
Right.
In that series.
The only thing I remember about that game is popping it into my Game Boy at your house and being totally and completely lost. And you said,
because I was probably in the middle of a game.
Right. I remember you just saying, oh, it's like Pokemon, and that, enticed me. I popped it in and I just said, this is nothing like Pokemon. I know nothing.
I would recommend giving it a play. I think it's worth your time.
So let's see, it's 10:30. Should we save our Game Boy Advance list for next time?
Yeah, I need to whittle it down.
Yeah. I'm going to get a little more granular with it. So I have the heavy hitters. I only have 15 games on there. Because again, I went in with like this sort of strict criteria. It's got to be the best of the best. And it's got to be, they're not going to do so many games. But because, like I said, the nature of the device, I think more games, the better. A little bit different on Game Boy Advance, I think, because, it's such an RPG machine. And it's basically the perfect version of the Super Nintendo in a lot of ways. And so the games were much, sort of fully fledged.
And that makes it hard too, because a lot of the best games in the Game Boy Advance are just SNES ports.
Yeah, I didn't put any of those on there. I would not, and I wouldn't expect that Nintendo would put anything. Super Mario,
the Mario Advance series.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to do that. It'd be silly, right?
That makes it rough though, because there's not a real Mario game on the Game Boy Advance. The closest you get is Mario vs. Donkey Kong, and that's like a weird Donkey Kong title.
Yeah, and
like classic arcade Donkey Kong, where it's a puzzle platformer, not a action platformer like Mario.
And the only Zelda game on there, original Zelda game,
Minish Cap,
is not fondly remembered by a mainstream audience. I don't think
it's kind of. I don't know. Yeah, people like it, but it's kind of like the DS games where nobody like loves them.
The DS games I think are a lot rougher than the Minish Cap. I think is a great experience and it's gorgeous.
Yeah, I feel like though that more people played the DS games.
Probably just because there's 120 million DSs in the wild,
Yeah.
So, but cool, man. We'll save that then for next time. We'll just do 10 minutes on that before we get into the news and other such things.
Yeah, cool. Sounds good.
This has been the motherfucking Console Crusade podcast.
Well, sorry everyone for talking your ear off about Game Boys.
Dude, I really hope this happens in the coming months. You saw Nintendo file a bunch of patents for some Game Boy stuff, right?
Yeah, but they're always filing patents. I don't know. I can't read too much into that.
Yeah.
I was more intrigued by the actual physical visual representation of the DMG. I thought that was a little bit more of a strong indication than just names and keeping those refreshed. Because they have to do that every like 3 years or something.
Oh, okay. So it's just sort of a serendipitous occurrence.
Probably. I haven't looked into it. It could be just totally indicative and I'm misreading it, but that's just the way I see it.
Fair enough. Cool, man. Well, find us on the Twitter. I am at eJiggle. This is at Presh Till Death. We are at console_crusade. Yeah, get at us.
We're super tired because it's not early.
That's exactly it. Neither of us slept more than 5 hours last night.
Perfect. It's the way I operate now.
Yeah. All right, cool. We'll catch you on the flippity flip.
Hubbub.
I hate video games.